Today I'm going to talk about how hobbies and teaching are analogous in many ways. The first hobby I'm going to talk about is cooking or baking. And both teaching and cooking or baking require advanced planning, preparation, and organization. For example, today I'm going to make homemade mozzarella cheese, which is something that my kids love. But before I do that, I first need to get out my recipe and gather all my ingredients and cooking tools that I'm going to need to make this cheese, including a giant pot, some cheesecloth, a digital thermometer, liquid animal rennet in a solution of water, citric acid in a solution of water, kosher salt, and whole milk. And this is very similar to teaching, in which you need to do a lot of advanced research and planning to figure out what concepts you're going to teach for the day. Once I've gathered all my materials, I then need to look through my recipe and figure out what the end result is going to be. This is similar to teaching and in using understanding by design to design an assessment and then backwards design the lesson based on what you want students to be able to know and do. In the case of cheese making, there's a lot of critical steps during the recipe where you need to very quickly add, for example, the animal rennet and the citric acid when the milk reaches a certain temperature. If you don't have these things ready in advance, it can lead to a failed cheese. Another thing that can happen is you need to have the right width and length of cheesecloth so that you can put it over the pot. So when you're done cooking the cheese, you need to dump the curds and whey over the cheesecloth to strain out all of the whey. And if your cheesecloth is not the right width or length, the curds and whey can end up dumping over the outsides and you won't catch all the cheese. So if you have any of those things happen, if you haven't prepared well enough or been organized enough in advance, you will have to stop, take the milk off of the heat temporarily while you pivot and adjust what you're doing. Either make your rennet solution or cut your cheesecloth again or do whatever it is you need to do. This is very similar to sometimes what happens in a lesson when you think you're prepared and it becomes clear that students don't know something that you thought they knew, or they're not understanding with the way you're explaining it, and you have to pivot quickly and go in a different direction. So this is how teaching and baking and cooking are similar. It requires a lot of planning, preparation, and you need to know what the end result is in advance and kind of backwards design what you're going to do from there. Sports and teaching, foundational skills are the bedrock that you build new skills and strength on. So in sports, I love to ski, run, and bike because you're out in nature and they're fast and the wind is blowing through your hair and they're really fun. However, if I go a stretch of time doing those things, I always find that I start to get tight muscles in my neck or a pulled hamstring or some kind of other pulled muscle and start to not feel very good. That's when I realized that I've started to neglect the foundational skills that are the basis of my ability to be successful in sports. So that would be my weight training, my lunges and my squats, and also stretching to try to keep muscles loose and limber and prevent things from tightening up on you. I think that's very similar to what happens in teaching. So students come to class to learn new skills, but they need a foundation of knowledge from prior classes to build on to be successful. So for example, in chemistry, students need a strong background in math. So they need to know how to isolate variables, correctly use order of operations, round numbers, use place value, correctly use their scientific calculator, and a host of other mathematical array of knowledge that they have learned in the past. I frequently find that they have forgotten things and that interferes with their ability to learn new things. So this year I've seen students using the variable button for multiplication. I've seen them, many students incorrectly using scientific calculators by not using parentheses in the right place. So they will frequently set problems up entirely correctly, but get the answer to every problem wrong because they're not using their calculator correctly. This is very similar to sports training, where if I'm trying to get in shape or run a faster half marathon or complete that 35-mile ride on my bike on the weekend or ski moguls all day, it's frequently not the skiing, running, or biking that is the problem. It's oftentimes some foundational skills, so strength in my legs or not enough flexibility that I need to address. And that is similar to how students learn. Sometimes there is some weakness in the underlying foundation that needs to be addressed in order for them to progress in their learning. Teaching and gardening both require cultivation. In order to reap the benefits of beautiful flowers and vegetables in the summer, you need to add nutrients to the soil in the spring. In a similar way, teachers need to cultivate a relationship with students in order to lay the groundwork for their hard work and perseverance at schoolwork later on. When the weather first starts warming up and I start thinking about planting my garden, I first amend the soil, replenishing nutrients lost from last year's plants, and then I till the soil, creating space for more water retention and also for the roots to penetrate more deeply. This is very similar to the work that a teacher does with students in developing a learning partnership. Teachers need to create a bond with students based on a sense of mutual respect and trust. And this will empower students to take learning risks. When this bond is created, and with a lot of pushing and a lot of caring, teachers can encourage students to get into their zone of proximal development without initiating a defensive or emotional response that can tend to shut down learning. Having this connection creates a sense of relaxed alertness in students that enables the best learning to take place. In this way, cultivating a garden and cultivating relationships with students is very similar. In conclusion, hobbies are similar to teaching in many ways. Baking and cooking are similar to teaching in that you need a lot of planning, preparation, and organization to get started. You also need to know where you're going in order to know how to get started and what steps you're going to take along the way to get to your end point. Sports is like teaching in that flexibility and strength are the foundational skills that underpin every sports activity that you would undertake. And similar to this, literacy in mathematics forms the foundational skills for schoolwork and everything students will learn from that point forward. And finally, gardening is very similar to teaching in that both hobbies require cultivation at the start. So gardening requires cultivation of the soil, and teaching requires cultivation of connections and relationships with students.